From the News Channel 5 Network, this is SportsLine.
Hey there, SportsLine on your television. Steve Lehman here with you. Glad you are here with us on this Tuesday night on News Channel 5, plus tons of football to talk about. The Titans looking to make it 2 in a row this week. They will host the Browns on Sunday noon. You can watch it on News Channel 5 if you do not attend the game in person over at Nissan Stadium. Of course, college football, massive weekend. Tennessee, Alabama in Knoxville, also on News Channel 5, Saturday afternoon, 2:30. Can the Vols bounce back and finally beat Alabama? End the streak against the Crimson Tide, and more importantly, really cement their place atop the SEC East Division. They got the wins over Florida and Georgia already. Now the job is essentially just don't lose. If you keep on winning, you're going to win this division. And even with the win last week, or the loss last week to Texas A&M, Vols are in good position. You lose to Alabama, and depending on what happens in the rest of the SEC and what happens on the schedule, you might be in a little bit of trouble. And I say that because we all know Florida and LSU did not play this last weekend because of Hurricane Matthew. Despite the fact Hurricane Matthew was about 500 miles to the north by the time that game would have been played. And Gainesville is about, 75 miles inland, 100 miles inland, something like that. It was sunny in Florida on Saturday. And it was a day in which they could have played. Now, I understand this was a bad hurricane and had bad effects on the coast. Some first responders from the Gainesville area had to go to the coast. That was all planned ahead of time. But here's my problem with how the SEC handled this. There were options here. We watched it in other places. I mean, if you looked first off at some of the games that were played on Saturday, did you see Notre Dame, NC State, or Virginia Tech, North Carolina? Those two games there in the Triangle in Raleigh-Durham, which, again, aren't on the coast, but they got hit by the hurricane. I mean, I would say they were played in monsoons, but they were played in hurricanes. It was absolutely pouring. Wind was terrible. Offensive conditions were practically unplayable. But they played. They figured out a way to get out there on the field and play a football game. So that's one option, to just figure out how to tough it out. Maybe not the prettiest game ever at the Swamp, but just get out there and play. If you say, okay, first responders going to the coast, we can't make that happen on Saturday. All right, I get that. It was a couple days after when Matthew really hit. So what are your other options? Well, Georgia and South Carolina moved their game from Saturday to Sunday afternoon. They got it in just fine in Columbia. Why couldn't LSU and Florida have done that? Or if you really had to, why not play the game Monday? Give us a rare Monday night college football game. That could have been an option. LSU's been through this several times before. They lost a game last year due to a hurricane. I don't know if it was last year or 2 years ago. They brought South Carolina to Baton Rouge to host what was a South Carolina home game because of a hurricane at that point in time. And if I remember correctly, I think all the tickets that were sold on 2 or 3 days' notice went directly to help victims of that particular hurricane. You know, it became a real feel-good story when they did that. It's not ideal, but it means you play the football game, and it helps some people in the process. LSU offered to do the same thing. They said, look, we've been through this before. We've lost games. We had massive flooding here this summer. There's all sorts of reasons that we want to help you out here. We have a stadium available. The weather's supposed to be nice. Come to Baton Rouge. We'll make sure the game is played. We'll figure something out. Florida said, no, we're not going to do that. Not going to travel, not going to give up the home game. We're just not going to play. So here's the problem. They didn't play any day last weekend. Not Saturday, not Sunday, not Monday, not in Gainesville, not in Baton Rouge, not anyplace else. They did not play the game. And here's the problem for the rest of the season. Those two teams don't have an open date together. So when do you play this? There's several thoughts out there. The most likely one would be that both teams play non-conference games on November the 19th. The thought is that they can both just buy out their opponents, LSU, South Alabama, Florida, Presbyterian, and just play the game that Saturday. And you'll be fine. Schedule's all fixed. That may very well happen. SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey expressed his belief of the importance of that game being played for those two teams, for the SEC race. Because remember, this definitely affects Tennessee. If Florida wins out and doesn't play LSU, who seemingly should be one of the tougher opponents on the Florida schedule the rest of the way, and Tennessee loses top 10 matchups with Texas A&M and Alabama, Florida could end up going to the SEC championship game. If the SEC doesn't finagle their way into only saying, all right, because of this year we're only counting inter-division games, that may be the fair option here. But for now, we haven't seen that officially talked about. So it's important they play this game. Here's the problem with November 19th, though. LSU is supposed to turn around 5 days later and play Texas A&M on that Thursday. There's a big difference between playing South Florida and turning around in 5 days. Or I'm sorry, South Alabama and turning around in 5 days after a game you likely dominated, and playing an SEC slobber knocker against Florida and having to turn around in 5 days and play another team in the top 10. There's a lot of reasons to not want to do that. But the biggest thing from the LSU perspective is, regardless, if you have to play that game that day, they have to give up a home game over this. That stinks anytime. But if you look at the numbers, something like 90% of all the revenue that comes into the city of Baton Rouge each year comes off of the 6 or 7 football home dates that the Tigers play. Almost 90% of the revenue. And this year, if we remember back just a couple of months ago, Baton Rouge and the surrounding area was absolutely pummeled by floodwaters. Neighborhoods were ruined, homes were destroyed, businesses destroyed. This is a community that needs economic impact in the worst way right now. So not just is it one of your typical, hey, we would really like our home game, we don't want to give that up. This is an actual, our city's gone through crisis itself in the last couple of months. We're a vehicle to help recovery, and you're going to deprive not just our football team of a home game, but our city of that economic impact, the region of the economic impact. That's a big reason why Joe Oliva, the LSU athletic director, is kind of sticking his toes in the sand on this one and saying, hold on. We don't want to play November 19th. We're going to play a home game that day, just like it was scheduled. We need it. Our city, our community needs it. The SEC's got to figure something out here. At the moment, it is a very bad look. And Greg Sankey, who had big shoes to fill replacing Mike Slive as the SEC commissioner, for the first time, looks out of place on this one. This was an opportunity last week for him to kind of flex his muscles as the commissioner of the best conference, certainly in college football. Certainly one of the two most lucrative conferences along with the Big Ten, you can make a pretty good argument that Greg Sankey and Big Ten Commissioner Jim Delaney should be the two most powerful men in sports. So here's an opportunity, at least college sports. Here's an opportunity for Greg Sankey to flex some of that muscle and get it right. Last week he had plenty of options. Played in Gainesville, played in Baton Rouge, played somewhere in between, played on any number of days. Figure it out Wednesday or Thursday of last week like so many other places did, and make sure you get the game played because it's that important. He didn't do that. And now he's got a mess on his hands that he's got to fix. And at the moment, however he fixes it, and these schools agree upon it, it looks messy. Somebody's going to be unhappy. And it didn't have to be that way. This was a total failure by Greg Sankey, by the University of Florida, and by LSU last week. And I put most of the blame there on Florida and Greg Sankey for not getting it done because LSU wanted to play. They would have played anywhere last week on any day. What they're now being difficult about is moving forward. They're saying you guys put in no effort to get this done last week, and now anything we do moving forward greatly inconveniences our team, our university, and our community. Frankly, that's a pretty good argument. I have a feeling at some point they're going to acquiesce to that stance a little bit, and ultimately this game is going to get played. It better. But again, this is messy. And for Greg Sankey, a guy who has one of the premier jobs in college sports, it shouldn't be that way. This is where you've got to step in and get it right in the first place. And he didn't. So we will see what happens. Obviously, Tennessee fans very, very invested to not just the scheduling of that game, but the outcome of that football game. Because Florida's, that is the toughie of Florida's crossover opponents. Tennessee draws the unfortunate luck of getting Texas A&M and Alabama this year from the West, and oh, by the way, getting them in back-to-back weekends. Florida doesn't have to deal with that. And if you look at the rest of the SEC East, who's a real threat to either of these teams? I mean, South Carolina's not going to beat either team. Vanderbilt's not going to beat either team. Kentucky's not going to beat either team. I don't think Missouri beats either team, barring real shockers. So unless Georgia beats Florida in a couple weeks, this thing gets really messy if this game isn't played. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Your thoughts on that game, 737-7767 is the number. Your thoughts on Tennessee, Alabama this weekend. Can the Vols make this kind of a moot discussion? Will they come out and beat the number one team in the country on Saturday and in essence kind of lock up the division? Because they've already beaten Florida. They've already beaten Georgia. So you got tiebreakers head-to-head there. If you only have one loss, and you can run the table against those teams I mentioned, you're going to win the division, and nothing else will matter. Can the Vols take care of business with all the injuries they've had? We'll talk about that coming up. Vanderbilt, how hot is Derek Mason's seat? Another loss to Kentucky over the weekend. More on the Titans as well. Predators dropping the puck this week, Friday night, first game of the season against the Blackhawks. Ooh, that'll be fun over at Bridgestone Arena. 737-7767 is the number. We will field your phone calls. Lines completely open right now. We would love to hear from you tonight. We'll take our first break. We'll come back. More SportsLine on the way after this on News Channel 5+.